I mean, there's a lot. I would say if I had to pick a top three, I would say number one is authenticity, right? Being yourself, being real. Number two is compassion for others, but also for yourself. And number three would be courage. And all of those things are actually related to each other, right? To be authentic takes courage. To be compassionate also takes courage, right? And within courage, like courage isn't about not being scared. Courage is about being willing to say things and do things and not sure if they're going to work out.
Welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Aishwarya Jain, and let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year, and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Mike Robbins is an author, speaker, and coach. He's written 5 books and is a podcast host of We're All in This Together. His latest book is We're All in This Together, Creating a Team Culture of High Performance, Trust, and Belonging. His work has been featured in Fast Company, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and on NPR. He's also a regular contributor to Forbes, Medium, and Thrive Global. We're extremely happy and honored to have him on our interview series today. Welcome, Mike. We're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks, Mike. So let's begin a little bit about your history and your interesting book, which is called We're All in This Together. If you could just give us a small idea of what it's all about.
Well, I mean, the book it's my 5th book, as you mentioned. And, I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. And I've been fascinated by teamwork and team dynamics and company culture for most of my career doing this. And that actually comes from my background as an athlete. I grew up here in the US. I live in California and played baseball all growing up as a kid, which is a sport that we like to play here in the United States. I know there's not a ton of baseball in India. It's a little like cricket, but different. But I was pretty good at it. I actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees, which is one of our pro baseball teams here in the U.S. I didn't end up signing a contract with the Yankees because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford University, which is about an hour from where I grew up. And I went to Stanford and I played baseball there. Then I got drafted out of Stanford by another pro baseball team here in the U.S. called the Kansas City Royals. And the way that it works in professional baseball in the US is that you sign a contract with a major league team, but you have to go into what's called the minor leagues. And there's like 6 different levels of the minor leagues that you kind of work your way up to make it to the major leagues. Unfortunately for me, I got injured. I tore ligaments in my elbow, my pitching arm, which was kind of an important part of being a baseball player and a pitcher. So my career ended. I had a series of surgeries and wasn't able to come back. But I basically played baseball from the age of 7 until I was 23 when I got hurt, and then 25 when I finally retired. And I was super disappointed, as you can imagine, personally, that my sports career ended because I loved playing. But the thing that I became most interested in, particularly by the time I got to college and I was playing professionally, was really fascinated by team dynamics, because I was on some teams sometimes where we had really good talent, like great players, but the team wasn't very good. And then I was on some other teams where, the talent was decent, not great, and the team was fantastic. We would beat other teams that had better players than we did, which seems strange because in sports, you figure if you have the best athletes, right, the best players, you should have the best team. It's not always the case. Again, whether it's baseball or cricket or football or any sport, right, it's like you would think. But anyway, I thought that had something to do with sports. And then I moved back home. It's the late 90s. I get a job working in the internet sort of .com world, because, I grew up in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area. And I realized right away, that whole team chemistry thing we talked about in sports, that's not a sports thing. That's a human thing. We just call it culture in business. And so I spent a couple years working for a few different internet companies in the 90s, and then started my consulting business 20 years ago with this curiosity about, well, what does it take to really create that kind of team culture and team chemistry? And I've spent the last 20 years studying that and writing about that and speaking about that. And this book, We're All in This Together, is kind of a culmination of my work over the last 2 decades. And it really lays out some specific things that leaders and teams can do to create a culture of performance, of trust, of belonging, And so that's a long answer to your very simple question, but that's a little bit about my background and a little bit about what the book's about.
Thank you so much for that. You've had a very interesting journey. I'm sure it must have been very difficult for you to, move from something that you were so passionate about, but you had to give that up because of the injury that you had. And Mike, you've kind of had clients that are really those top level organizations and hundreds of thousands of people involved in those.
Yeah.
What do you think are the first few steps in creating a culture of really high performing teams?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few things. Yeah, I mean, a number of the clients I've had a chance to work with are, companies like Google and Microsoft and Charles Schwab and Nutanix, and a lot of them actually have a lot of people in India and all around the world that work for their organizations. I mean, I do think there is some value and some power in the brand itself. Although, you know what I mean? So why do people want to go work for a company? Well, because they resonate with the brand, or they use the service or the products, or they, right? Now, that said, I remember talking to a guy named Stuart Crabb, who has been a friend of mine for a number of years. He was the head of learning and development at Facebook in Facebook's early days when they were growing, and they were really one of the top companies in the Valley that everybody wanted to work for. And he said something interesting, though. He said, Mike, even at that time when we were really, like the hottest company around, we still had people who would leave. And when they would leave, we would do exit interviews, and we would ask them, why are you leaving? Because this is such a great place. Everybody seems to want to work here. Why are you going somewhere else? And he said, what we found in those exit interviews almost every time was that the manager trumps the brand. Meaning that if people, the saying goes, people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. So much of what drives a culture of a company, whether it's a big company, a global company like Facebook or Google or it's a smaller business, a startup, it's the managers, it's the people, it's how we interact with each other, because our experience of work, and even right now in this crazy, work from home, quarantined, we're not together, my experience of work, even if I work for a company that has hundreds of thousands of employees, is going to be my interaction with my own direct manager, my interaction with my peers, and if I manage people, the interactions I have with the people who report to me. Like, that's really, maybe some customers and some clients if I have an external facing role, maybe some cross-functional partners depending on what I do, but it's really like, how many people do we really interact with in our jobs in a personal way? 20, 30 people, if the company's even that big, maybe more, but so much of it has to do with the relationships that we have with each other.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important part of leadership as well, right? How do leaders interact with their employees to create the right kind of culture? And I think these great organizations, you have Google, Zappos, they're known for their culture. But do you think that, when there are startups that are really, now trying to create a culture, when they think that, okay, let me try to replicate Google's culture, do you think that's the right step to take, or is culture just built ground up?
I think it varies, right? I mean, if you're going to start a company and you're going to emulate a company like Google or Zappos or some place that you read about or hear about, wow, they have a great culture, I think there's things you can learn. But a company like Google that's a global brand and has over 100,000 employees is obviously going to be different than a startup that maybe has 2 people, 5 people, 12 people, whatever. I mean, it has to make sense for the business that you're in. That said, one of the issues I've seen working with startups over the years is it's so challenging to start a company, obviously, for so many reasons, but there's kind of this sense, oh, hey, we got to get this business viable first. We got to actually make some money and figure out if there's a real plan and get some people to invest in this business so we can grow it. And it's almost like culture is sometimes an afterthought, which unfortunately, then I've seen companies grow and there's 10 people and there's 50 people and there's 100 people. And now all of a sudden the business is off the ground, but we didn't really spend a lot of time early on thinking about what are our core values and who are we and what do we stand for and who are the type of people we want to hire and what really matters to us, because we sort of felt like we don't know if this thing's going to actually work, which makes sense. But I do think it's important for companies at every stage to really invest in culture and invest in people. And sometimes we may not have the financial resources to do that specifically. Like, you're not going to necessarily hire a head of HR as your 4th employee or someone whose job it is to focus on culture like as their primary function early on. But you can be talking about it, you can be thinking about it, you can be, I think of my own team, which isn't a startup, but is relatively small. It's like we talk about culture and we talk about people and our relationships with each other all the time because that's the business that we're in. But over the years, I had to learn, I can't just go out in the world and talk about it. I got to actually practice it myself.
Right, absolutely. And when you talk about that, you really have to invest in culture. Now, when you talk to your team about culture, there can be a lot of different opinions on the table. There would be a lot of different perspectives. So, how do you think, you could be a great leader and then, pick out the best core values and, propagate that? Because you are talking to so many people. How do
Right.
you maintain a balance?
Well, I think, look, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in the sort of Gandhian principle of be the change, right? How do you want people to operate in your organization? If you're a leader at any level, most leaders I talk to, again, we're all different. We have our own different personalities. We have obviously different cultures. You and I live in very different parts of the world. But most leaders I talk to, it's like, what do you want from the people around you? Well, I want people to be engaged. I want people to be passionate. I want people to be responsible. I want people to work hard. I want people to be committed. I want people to communicate openly. I mean, we go down the list of sort of the top 10 things. Not every leader is going to have the same list, but a lot of the things are going to be pretty much the same. And then whenever I'm coaching a leader, or I even think about myself and my own leadership, the first question I ask is like, are you doing those things? Are you practicing those things? Not like you have to be perfect, but it's like if I want people to be responsible, if I want people to be engaged, if I want people to work hard, if I want people to be authentic, I got to first look at myself and say, how am I showing up that way? Because that's going to give me the credibility to both inspire people, but also if there's some of those things aren't happening, when I go to talk to them and say, hey, you know what? Here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I'm concerned about. They're not going to turn to me and go, what are you talking about? You don't ever do that. It's the leader that says, make sure you ask for help when you need help. And then they never ask for help. It's like, well, you're not modeling that. Make sure you tell me what you really think, especially if you disagree with me. But either the leader doesn't do that, him or herself, or when the person does that, the leader gets really upset. Like, how dare you question me? And you're like, well, wait a minute. Didn't you tell me you wanted my feedback and now you don't like it because I don't agree with you? Like, which is it? So a lot of what leadership is about, again, it's a personal growth journey. It's getting more in touch with who we are and learning about ourselves. We're never going to be perfect. That's not the goal. But the goal is to be as authentic as we can. The book that I wrote previous to We're All in This Together is called Bring Your Whole Self to Work, which is really about authenticity. It's about how leaders and all of us, whether we're in a leadership role or not, can show up and bring all of who we are to the work that we do. And that's often what creates, the most connection and engagement and ultimately drives the culture.
Yeah, absolutely agree to that. It's really your authenticity that will, help you create a bridge between your employees and, you would be more in touch with yourself being a leader. Uh,
Yeah.
what, according to you, in your personal opinion, are the three most important characteristics that make a great leader?
I mean, there's a lot. I would say if I had to pick a top three, I would say number one is authenticity, right? Being yourself, being real. Number two is compassion for others, but also for yourself. And number three would be courage. And all of those things are actually related to each other, right? To be authentic takes courage. To be compassionate also takes courage, right? And within courage, like courage isn't about not being scared. Courage is about being willing to say things and do things and not sure if they're going to work out. So again, can we authentically do that? And the thing about compassion, oftentimes things like compassion get thought of as like soft or, but it's actually hard and super important to be compassionate. Can I be compassionate when somebody fails? Can I be compassionate when I fail? Can I be compassionate when we disagree or we're really different? Can I be curious about your culture as an example, or a way of working, or just your, personality is obviously going to be different than mine. And so can I listen to that with some compassion, with some empathy? So yeah, I think authenticity, compassion, and courage are three of the most important aspects of being a great leader.
Yeah, that's so wonderful because I think as leaders we have to be risk takers, and that takes a lot of courage, in every way. Uh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think it's very important to have courage and compassion to lead the way forward. And especially, I think, Mike, in these times when we're all struggling because of remote working and employees are, they don't feel connected sometimes because they're not really seeing each other's faces or whatever reason. How do you think that
Yeah.
increase the engagement in employees at this point in time?
Well, look, I mean, I think you're right. It's hard, obviously. I think for each of us and everybody listening, especially, maybe if you're listening to this or watching us many, many months from now or years from now, will have obviously and hopefully changed for the better, and we'll be back spending more time with each other. But I think for a lot of us, and a lot of, myself included, a lot of the leaders and teams I'm working with, it's a stressful time. It's challenging. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, health wise, economically. There's stress for people at home. Kids are home and spouses, and some people have lost their jobs. And we're trying, I mean, all the different things that everyone's dealing with. Some people are isolated all by themselves. I mean, the analogy, it's interesting. I wrote this book, We're All in This Together, with no idea that it would come out in the middle of this pandemic that's impacting the globe. And a lot of people are using that phrase. Although what's interesting is then people recently, I've been on some podcast interviews and other places where people push back and say, wait a second, we're not all in this together. People are having very different experiences. And I like the metaphor of, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And it's like, my boat and your boat might look really differently. Because again, maybe I have 3 kids at home and my wife lost her job, and maybe you're home by yourself, or maybe both you and your spouse have, grown kids, or, your job's stable. And so, I mean, again, it's very, very different. Even within the same team, within the same company, people's experiences are very different. If I'm an introvert and you're an extrovert, if, whatever the case may be. So that's a long way of saying, going back to those 3 things of authenticity, compassion, and courage, like, can we have some compassion for other people's experiences right now and be curious about it and be talking about it, not just acting as business as usual, even though we still have deadlines and we still have deliverables and we still have to get work done. It's an altered way of working. That said, we also don't want to spend all day, every day whining about working from home and how hard it is, because then, well, that's all we're going to do. So we have to figure out how to have some empathy and compassion for, yes, this is hard and challenging, and how are we still going to figure out how to not only get things done, but connect with each other? And one of the things I've been talking to teams and leaders about a lot in recent weeks and months is like, look, I know it's a lot harder to lead in this environment. I know it's a lot harder to work and collaborate in this environment. However, it's more important than ever that we really double down or triple down on anything that we know how to do with respect to connecting with each other. Some stuff's going to work, some stuff's not going to work. And that goes back to even, I think, a sense of vulnerability and a willingness for people, and especially leaders, to say, not like an excuse, but like, hey, this is hard. I've never done this before. Do you know what I mean? Like, work's hard enough, leadership's hard enough, and now we're all have to like sit at home and look at each other on Zoom. And like, that's not the way we worked before. Although we've all been working virtually to some degree, it's just never been all of us at the same time and being forced to do that. So again, I think it's a process of being able to evolve. And I know for myself, just, a few months into this, my thinking around a lot of this has changed just in a few months. I imagine if we're in this for another few months, God forbid, my thinking and some of the things I do with my own team and some of the actions and practices that are really going to work, they will change and evolve as this situation changes and evolves. So the really important thing for all of us is, can we be present in the moment and respond to ourselves and to others based on what's needed right now? And it might work for that moment or for that day or for that week or for that month, but then it's probably going to change.
Absolutely. I think the situation is just so dynamic right now that it's very important to be flexible. And as you said, leaders will really have to be compassionate, especially when you hear these cases of big organizations just laying off people over a Zoom call or,
Yeah.
just over Slack. And that's really sad because they are not acting as real leaders.
Yeah.
Um, and I think this also must be impacting organizational culture a lot, right? How
Yeah.
do you maintain the culture of the organization remotely, as well as generally speaking? How do you maintain it?
Again, it's hard. I mean, I think the reality is, and talking to a number of leaders and working with a lot of companies that have had to furlough people or lay people off, some that haven't yet and maybe won't based on the stability of their business or the industry they're in. I think, again, it's coming back to the core principles. If we have clear values for how we operate, if we have a clear set of principles by which we operate in terms of our own leadership, this situation, ideally, as challenging as it is, shouldn't change any of that. I love the saying, circumstances don't define us, they reveal us. And so, look, if I think about myself, right, am I more stressed out over the last couple of months based on this circumstance? Sure, I am. Is it more uncomfortable for me? I mean, I've had my business for 20 years. I've seen it grow. I've seen it ebb and flow at different times. I've gone through recessions, but I've never gone through anything like this. And so I've had moments with my own team where I've said and done things that I then regretted and came back the next day or the next hour and said, I'm so sorry. I was a little stressed out. I got a little upset about that thing. Please forgive me. I'm working through some of this, or whatever the case may be. And, again, the reality is having to lay people off over Zoom is probably not the most ideal, but laying someone off in person isn't usually that ideal either. And so, again, I think if you go into that conversation with some compassion, with some courage, with some authenticity, the outcome of the conversation is probably not what anybody wants, but there's a way to do it with humanity. There's a way to do it with care, even though in a perfect world, we could sit in the same room and shake hands or maybe even hug each other when it's over if that was appropriate. But right now, we're not able to do that. And that is difficult and that is hard. But I think, again, being able to, whether we're talking about something as significant as that, or even just acknowledging the elephant in the room, I think there's also a way, without sugarcoating the challenge of right now, is how can we look at this from a growth mindset perspective? Because I'm personally, even with the stress and the challenge and the uncertainty and the aspects of this that have been uncomfortable and painful for me, there's a part of me, and it keeps growing, where I kind of am excited about this. And I don't mean to minimize or diminish the challenge. I mean, people are losing their lives, they're losing their jobs. Like, this is serious. And the vast majority of us are going to be physically safe from this experience. More of us are going to be impacted by this economically, and even more of us are impacted by it emotionally and mentally. However, I think it's an unbelievable opportunity for growth. And I kind of wake up every day simultaneously. I'll say to my wife, I can't believe this is still happening. Like, it doesn't even seem real. And at the same time, there's this weird part of me that's kind of excited. Like, what am I going to have to figure out today? How's this going to work? Or how long is this going to go on? And I keep saying, even to our daughters who are 14 and 11, and they've been rolling their eyes at me when I say this, but I say, girls, pay attention right now, because you're going to be telling this story for the rest of your lives. Your kids, your grandkids, and look, all of us are going to be telling this story. And I think one of the questions we can ask our teams and the people we work with and our families is, hey, what's the story we want to tell ourselves and each other when all of this is over? I mean, again, it's going to be a mixed story of there were some highlights and there were some lowlights, but I'd rather the story be, for me and for our team and for our family, one that's kind of a heroic story. Like, hey, it was hard and we got knocked down and it was uncomfortable and it was scary and we did what we could, but like, not only did we make it through it and survive, but like, we learned and we grew and we became better human beings and a better team in the process. Because that's possible. I mean, a lot of us are all dealing with this challenging circumstance. What we can control is how we show up to meet the moment.
Absolutely. If you just keep a positive mindset, you can just grow and learn and, reskill, upskill so much. Yep. A great opportunity in disguise. Yep. Completely agree with you on that one. And to wrap up the interview, I'm going to ask you the last question. If you have any other important sound bites that probably would be useful for our audience.
I think, back to the compassion piece or the empathy piece, I think what's really important right now, as much as we can, is to give other people and ourselves the benefit of the doubt. Look, this is a challenging, stressful time. And again, the truth is, even as empathetic and curious and interested as I think I am as a human being, I don't know what it's like for you or any other human being as they're going through this, right? It's hard enough to even figure out what's going on inside of me. So I just think if we can, really give ourselves some space and have compassion and forgiveness for ourselves, most of us are doing the best we can, as are the people around us. And so I think if we remember that, not only during this stressful and challenging time, but that's a good way to operate in general. I've always believed that even people that drive me crazy or I don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, they probably didn't wake up in the morning and say, you know what I want to do? I really want to irritate him and drive him crazy. No, they're just doing what they think is the best thing to do in that moment. And part of what makes a great team is when we can come together, have that compassion for each other, and simultaneously challenge each other in a positive way, but figure out how to leverage our strengths with each other so we can do something great together.
Yeah, we're all in this together, as you say.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was really a pleasure having you on our series. I think I've had a very engaging and a very learning conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the great work you do. Keep it up.
Thank you. Stay safe, Mike, and let's keep in touch.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye-bye.